Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Cricket Unfiltered. I am your host, Menas. I'm joined by my two co-hosts, starting with Paul Dennett. Paul, welcome.
G'day, Menas. G'day, everyone. Great to be here.
And joining us from Network 10, Jelisa Apps. Jelisa, welcome.
Oh, hello. It's such a pleasure to be here with Paul. We've gone through HR, we've worked out our issues, and we're together again.
Well, we're fresh off our exciting announcement of our very first live show, Saturday, October 14th. Tickets go on sale June 9. So right in the middle of the World Test Championship final, because there will be no better way to celebrate Australia's ascendancy to the top of the Test Championship other than buying tickets to our show. So, yeah, very exciting. Paul and Jelisa and I have been chatting a lot about it. So it's going to come around quick. And yeah.
Yeah, Pat Cummins actually messaged me, said if Australia's batting during that, so Australia's, no, that joke doesn't work. No, it has to be one of the Indian players messaged me and said if they're batting during the time when the tickets go on sale, he's going to deliberately get out just so he can be first in the queue to buy them. That's a good joke, wasn't
it? I like that it became an unnamed Indian player.
Yeah, and we'll vet the material for the live show more than we do for the podcast. You can be rest assured of that. All right. So look, we thought we'd get together. Paul and I have been doing our weekly IPL Super Over shows, and actually we've been covering how the Aussies have been doing over in the IPL. So if you want to go and jump onto the IPL Super Over show, it's taking India by storm. You know, it's flying up the chart. So you know, go and consume that. But there's actually been quite a bit of domestic news on the cricket front. You know, really, cricket does never stop, and it's a cliche, one of many used by you know, people like me. But it really does. It doesn't stop because it's supposed to be the holiday period. But there's some things we just cannot ignore. So I've made Jelisa on a day off stump up. I've made Paul after a long day at work because they're both fired up. Like they got fired up about this Aussie international cricket schedule. Now, so they've released what's going to happen next summer. The Australian women's team are hosting the West Indies and South Africa, and the men are hosting Pakistan and the West Indies. Now, when the women's schedule dropped, 1st of October, North Sydney Oval, women's T20 International. It's essentially the opener to the international home summer. I thought, all good, no problems. But then I see this tweet from Jelisa, my rage at Cricket Australia's shambolic scheduling of the Australian women's cricket team, which includes one game on NRL Grand Final Day in Sydney. My rage has been temporarily calmed by hearing all the middle-aged men calling it to Jimmy Smith also raging. Well, Jelisa, why were you firstly raging at this schedule? This particular schedule, this game?
I think it's pretty obvious, Menas. It's the fact that you've scheduled the women's game, the first game, to be on the NRL Grand Final Day. And I know that I saw a tweet from you, which frankly I mostly ignored because I just knew you were poking the bear. Then you were like, I don't care if it's Grand Final Day. I'll still be going. I don't care about the Grand Final. Well, that's great for you, Menas, but there's two problems with that. The first one is you might want to deny the influence of the NRL Grand Final in Sydney, but you would be very ignorant. The second problem is that not only are you pitting the women's game up against the NRL Grand Final, but the exact time of the women's game you're putting up with the NRLW Grand Final. Now, there are a lot of young girls whose parents like to take them to both. So I find it just completely stupid. A lot of the counter arguments were saying, oh, it was the only time that they could do it. Oh, give me a break. Give me a break that it's the only time, the only location that they could do that fixture. Why don't you do it 2 hours down the road? If you could absolutely had to do it that day, do it 2 hours down the road in Canberra, because Canberra turns up to everything. As much as it pains me to say, I don't think the Canberra Raiders are going to make the grand final this year. I've slowly
Wow.
admitted that to myself. And so I don't think it was going to affect Canberra if you had it there. I still think it would be a silly day to do it, but I think that people would turn out to that. The third thing is not only are you affecting people going and you're affecting people watching either the NRLW or the women's game, you're affecting any media coverage. I will not be able to cover that game at all. I will not be covering the lead up at all. I will not be covering any aspect of that opening fixture at all because I will be diverted and all my resources will be diverted to covering the NRL Grand Final that week.
Yeah,
Why could you not do it a couple of days later when we have dead air on the TV, we have dead air in the papers, we have dead air where you could have filled it with a hell of a lot of promotion? I just find it shambolic.
I agree.
Yeah, hard to argue.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And I think that the notion that they had no choice, yeah, I mean, sure they could have done it the day before. The day before is a Saturday. What's wrong with the 30th of September?
Look, the only thing I would say that is the AFL Grand Final.
It's like we worked a bit, like a sort of Sydney versus Melbourne thing. What's that? The AFL Grand Final.
What is it? Wow.
And even if you were going to have that in Sydney, it is still quite a big day in Sydney. So, but the days afterwards, even if you did it midweek, it would have still worked better than doing it on the weekend. It would have still filled a lot of space in the media landscape, and people who wanted to go would have still gone.
Yeah, I mean, look, the thing the most compelling thing you said to me, Jelisa, was that the NRLW Grand Final is at the same time they're intending to play this match. With to me, just that doesn't make sense because, you know, as you said about they are a sort of similar fan base. So yeah, that swayed me. The only thing I would say is, without that component, if it was being played in another, say, Junction Oval in Melbourne, where they're not really into NRL down in Melbourne, and it was played in the afternoon, I wouldn't mind that so much. But yeah, but I think it's just silly to have it in the same city on the same day. And I looked at the TV ratings because, you know, I didn't know, but, you know, apparently a lot of people watched last year's NRL Grand Final, like 2.7 million people, which is down to me. Honestly, thought there'd be like 1 million people watching it. So
no, it's like the second high, like a State of Origin is the highest rating thing in the country, and then you've got the grand finals.
Yeah. So yeah, you win. I concede.
I think you already knew that. You were just playing with me.
The NRLW thing was the most compelling thing because I was one part of my argument was that I thought Cricket Australia would have some data that would sort of show that the audiences don't really cross over between like the men's NRL and the Australian women's cricket team attendance wise. But anyway, I've lost this argument. I'm not even
but also I wouldn't even agree with that because
just don't rub my face in it.
I was listening to the Jimmy Smith show on SEN, and
unfortunate.
There were a lot of men that were calling in because that audience is mostly men, and there were a lot of men calling in that were raging about the same thing. So I think the audience has kind of shifted a little bit towards there are more men and there are more older men watching women's cricket, not just young girls.
But surely if you're just sitting on your fat ass at home and you're an old man drinking beer, you can then go Australian Women's International in the afternoon goes into the NRL Grand Final. Like that's a great day.
But a lot of people like go to pubs and things. They're not going to show like, I don't know. There's a lot of event. Why risk competing?
I agree. It's an absolute stuff up. All right. So the Australian women play 3 T20 internationals against the West Indies, 2 at North Sydney, 1st and 2nd of October. And then you can come to the one the day after, Jelisa.
Thanks.
And then on the 5th of October at Allan Border Field in Brisbane. And then they play 3 one-day internationals against the West Indies. And then at the end of summer, they play South Africa in 3 T20s, 3 ODIs, and 1 test match, the first ever test match between the two countries. Now to the men's side of things. So some have called this a thin test summer. Paul, I guess, just what do you think of the men's international summer?
Absolutely disgraceful. I think it's the worst summer in prospect for 50 years. Now, that doesn't mean it will be the worst summer. Last summer ended up being a really poor summer because of the fact that South Africa and the West Indies didn't compete. Who knows? We might get some thrilling test matches. But just looking at it in prospect, I've gone back through every single season for the past 50 years. And I've got to go all the way back to 1973-74 to find a summer that had lower prospects. And that summer, we had 3 test matches against New Zealand, and that was it. There's no one-dayers, there's nothing else. Nothing else. That was worse. Every summer subsequent to that, we have had better test matches. We've had one-dayers when it meant something. We've had World Cups, so many different things. Not only that, this summer, in terms of free-to-air content, we have 5 test matches of free-to-air content only. At least last summer we had the World Cup with some free-to-air stuff. The fact that the one-dayers and the T20s are behind the paywall, we're still right at the limit of the least amount of free-to-air television that you're going to get for the cricket. Now, Pakistan, we have a pretty good rivalry with. It could be better. I could see if we'd nurtured it more, the Australia-Pakistan rivalry could approach the Australia-India rivalry. Hopefully one day it will. This is no slight on Pakistan. They're a wonderful cricketing nation. I'm really excited about them coming out here. They're 200 million people. It's fantastic. But not only have they not won a test match in Australia since 1995-96, they haven't drawn a test match in Australia since 1995-96. It's pinning a lot on a team that hasn't won since, bloody Paul Keating was Prime Minister. To expect them to save the summer. But those 3 test matches are all that we've got, because the West Indies, as much as we always say they were, once great and we wish they were great again, they are abjectly terrible at the moment. And to have them 2 successive summers is an absolute disgrace, and Cricket Australia should hang their heads in shame and don't blame the vagaries of the schedule. I'm always very forgiving about the schedule, and I know it's difficult, but this is pathetic. To have them for 2 test matches when we should be having our best players playing in the Big Bash. Instead, we're going to have 2 test matches, and then to top it off, the insult of the insult, 3 one-day games in early February. I mean, one-day cricket's absolutely dead in this country, and then 3 T20s. All against the West Indies. So we're going to have 8 consecutive matches against the West Indies to conclude the summer. Already, once February kicks in, cricket, I used to have that hashtag fight for February. Well, it's like the AFL and the rugby league are doing the schedule, because it'll be a national joke of people saying, "Oh, do you realise the cricket's still on? I can't watch it because it's not on free to air." But Australia's playing 50 over. Yes, 50 over. It still exists. Matches against the West Indies. Australia got 400. The West Indies got 200. And already, even an hour after the game, even the century makers in the match can't remember the result. They don't even have any memory of playing. And the crowd of 400 have all been sent to sort of inquiry as to why they turned up. It's just it's a summer that I'm not looking forward to. And I have never said that about an Australian international cricket. I'll watch the Pakistan test matches with hope, and I'll watch the West Indies test matches because I'm a masochist. But for the average Australian sports fan who's not a welded on cricket follower, let's hope the women's internationals show something. Let's hope the Big Bash shows something, because the men's international summer, as I said, it's the worst for half a century.
Yeah, I have to agree with Paul. I'm not enthused for the reasons that he's said. I guess playing devil's advocate a little bit, when we're talking about, Pakistan, that relationship could have been, or that rivalry could have been nurtured a bit. Well, maybe this is the only way to nurture it. It's sort of like, if we want to, we can't keep bringing India and England and India and England and India and England. But I agree with you, Paul. I'm not enthused. And the run of games with the West Indies is just, they're completely pointless.
It's a very good point that you make, because I kind of can't have it both ways. I can't say we should nurture the relationship but not have them. But what I'm saying is that 3-test series against Pakistan, I welcome it. But the fact that it is the only thing in the summer that I'm looking forward to, that's a concern. I mean, I know that Australia, I think we're going to New Zealand after that. Am I right, Menczel? We've got a couple
That's
of tests.
right, yeah.
surely Cricket Australia could have done some sort of deal with Channel 7 to say, please show those games on 7 Mate, even though the AFL season will have started, something to extend the summer beyond what it currently is. I think there's a real opportunity there. I think that the time zone's pretty good, and I think that there'd be some interest. But
Totally agree.
the other thing with Pakistan is, if we're going to nurture them, like they'll turn up having had one warm-up game at most, and most likely get absolutely obliterated. What I would much rather see is for them to have bitten the bullet and say, right, come along, we'll have 3 proper warm-up games, and we'll have a 5 test match series. And the West Indies, we're going to flex our muscles and say to the ICC, no, we're not playing them. We'll play them in Darwin at some point in the future, but we're not playing them this year. Be a bit India-like, flex our piddling little muscles that we have a proper 5 test series against Pakistan, and give the country the chance to get to know the Pakistani players, and hopefully, as it used to sometimes do, the series could grow legs and be pretty cool. But I think I understand why it's eventuated this way, and I understand that they can't just have England and India and no one else, but this is a dire summer in prospect.
What I'd really like is, I know it's so hard, and I know it hasn't been possible, but I really would love some way to work out the main test matches being New Zealand coming here. I know just sacrificing their summer, that would be a sacrifice for them, but I still think it would pay dividends for them in terms of broadcasting rights and that kind of thing. I really think that that is the summer that everyone wants to see outside of India and England.
Absolutely.
Certainly I do.
I really agree with that. And I think that when New Zealand...
I can't believe you're saying New Zealand should just give up their test matches. They're probably desperate to get us there, and you'll just say, just give them up.
No. They should say, I think she's talking about maybe the fact that New Zealand would have domestic fixturing during that period. But we should just say, actually, come over. And they'd say yes. I'm getting all arrogant, throwing our little weight around. But I really do think that the New Zealand relationship and the Pakistan relationship are the two that we should be nurturing much, much more than we have, that they can then, England and India are the 2 big ones. Sadly, West Indies at the moment, there seems no prospect of ever being big again. South Africa last summer really put a dent in that, but I haven't given up on that. But I think that, if we could get some sort of schedule where it was Pakistan, New Zealand, India and England as our main rivals each of the 4 alternating years, with 5 test matches, that would be really good.
Wow, what an absolute blast you just gave the schedule. I mean, I agree with you, but there is, it's incumbent upon the World Test Championship that you have to play certain nations a certain amount of time. So we are obligated to host the West Indies. It's just, it's poor structure that the last cycle ended with a home West Indies, and this cycle's beginning with a home West Indies. I think that's got to be fixed so it doesn't happen again. But yeah, look, it's very soft.
You know what, Manners? I really miss the days when you didn't invoice Cricket Australia.
Well, I just know how the World Test Championship works.
I'm just kidding.
And then the pay TV, but I've actually written on my notes the pay TV series for the 6 white ball games against the West Indies, because as you said, Paul, in a text message, that these could be the lowest point in home international cricket.
Yeah, I mean, it's a travesty that those games, that white ball internationals for the men's, are behind a paywall. But as I jokingly said, maybe for these 6, it's a good thing. So they will be hidden, because they'll be just, the 3 T20s won't be so bad. It's just 50 over cricket. I just don't think it's got a future in Australia outside of a World Cup. Remember last summer when Australia played England of all teams in 3 50 over games, and they were regarded as a joke. I just cannot see a future for bilateral 50 over Australia. And that's tragic.
They're just content series. They're just content series. They're to sell ads. That's all they are. Unfortunately, that's just my cynical point of view.
We
Have
knew
you-
this was going to happen in the pay deal, like
Mm.
in the broadcast deal. We like right back when this broadcast deal was done. I remember we all sat there and raged, and we were like old man yelling at clouds sort of vibes. But I mean, it has come to fruition.
But it's such a sad thing that just back to the test schedule that last summer the Big Bash, it's commonly agreed, restored some of its prestige, and a big reason for that was people like Steve Smith performing so well. Suddenly to just go, oh, sorry, the test players won't be available. What are you going to say, Menace?
Well, I was going to raise the point that it would actually be more worthwhile that, some of the best, Big Bash players not playing those test matches against the West Indies and playing the Big Bash, and, give a few punters a go against the West Indies.
Just playing both. I've sometimes said before when there's a one-day game on it used to annoy me. There's a one-day game on the 15th of January, and so the Big Bash had to stop, and so the Australian players would have to play that, and the next day they weren't released back to their franchise. Like, these guys play 5 days in a row, have 3 days off, and play 5 days in a row. They could do that. Well, I reckon they could go even further. If the test match is on, just schedule a Big Bash game in town, and you could say to Steve Smith, you just got out. The Sixers are 2 for 70. Can you just pop down the road to the other ground, have a dig there, and then come back? Or, it won't matter. Might as well get the best of both worlds, because in all seriousness, it is ridiculous that the Australian players are going to be playing test matches against the West Indies when they could be playing in the Big Bash. And there's a whole year that you can put those test matches in.
And on that, I'd like you to go to the next ACA meeting, the Australian Cricketers Association, and bring up that playing consecutive days. Don't think that'd be too favourable, unfortunately. Just on the test match, the way they pan out. So it's Perth, Melbourne, Sydney against Pakistan. And then it's a day test against Adelaide. And then there's a day-night test to end the summer against the West Indies at the Gabba, starts on the 25th of January and finishes on the 29th of January. And obviously that means that the Australian men's cricket team will be playing on the 26th of January, Australia Day, a day that has a lot of issues domestically. Ash Gardner, Australian women's cricketer, spoke about her disappointment with this decision. Scott Boland, the Australian fast bowler, supported her comments. I guess, Jelisa, where are you on this?
Oh, it's a really hard one because, I mean, I am not an Indigenous Australian, so it doesn't affect me. So I just appreciate that it affects someone else. So, I think, I don't imagine past this year you will see that happen again. I think there's the movement away from any kind of celebration on that date is kind of ramping up in the past couple of years, even with organisations such as my own. We can take the public holiday on another day. So I think there's a big movement away from that, and I imagine this will probably be the last year that you'll see something like that.
Paul, what about you?
I broadly agree. I'm not as confident that it'll be the last, but I think it is one of the last. I think it's and I just think that Cricket Australia probably in a meeting have said, well, if we were to not play it on that date, then what are we going to do? Push the test match later, push it to a period where there is no weekends, or have a rest day, and whatever they were going to choose was, in their view, probably so inferior that they were willing to take the hit on the PR of having it on that day, which is a pity, because you would like to see them say, okay, yep, we're going to do what we think is the right thing. We're not going to play on that date. And if it costs us some broadcasting dollars or some prestige television periods, well, we'll do it. But, that's, businesses don't necessarily run that way.
And look, the cricket schedule is very, very tight in both women's and men's cricket. And, I know you were talking about, could you bring, say, that first international back earlier to start the season, Paul, earlier? Well, the WBBL will be finishing just before those internationals. So, and then at the end of the international summer for the men, they can't just give up a few days and wait till the 26th of January passes because, they've got to play get to New Zealand, play that series, and there'll be players going on to the IPL. So, Cricket Australia are in a tough position, and it shouldn't be on them to decide what happens on January 26th. They're not the government. So I think they've done the right thing starting at the day before where they can avoid kind of any festivities. But I do understand that it's a complicated day and there's no real solution until the government sorts it out.
Yeah, I hear you. But, and yes, the schedule is very, very difficult, but there comes a point where if you just say, well, we can't do it, we have to find alternatives, then alternatives can be found. But back to my other point around just the general schedule for the men's internationals, I just think that there's a level of feeling as though, I don't know whether they really value Test cricket as much as they claim to. That we should have a landmark Test match series every summer in this country, and this year we've got potentially half of one, and I just don't think it's good enough.
You just sound really depressed about it, genuinely sad,
Yeah,
like
you
really
are.
genuinely sad about
Hurting
it.
my soul.
Yeah, listeners will be like, well, we're gonna take a quick break now. That was the international schedule. So, Jelisa and Paul have blasted it. Somehow I've ended up defending Cricket Australia through that. So anyway, so we're going to take a quick break. Then we'll be back with some more cricket news. Welcome back to Cricket Unfiltered. I am Menczel. I'm joined by Paul and Jelisa, and it is a lot of cricket news we're chatting about and some major news for the Big Bash. Major news. After 6 seasons, they've wound it back from 14 rounds to 10 rounds. And we were talking before the break about the international schedule and how thin it was. Well, this is a major opportunity for the Big Bash to capitalize on what Paul just went on about for 20 minutes. And, the Big Bash can really shine because I'll start with you, Paul. You've seen this happen in the past when the international summer is thin. It does shine a light on the Big Bash.
Have I?
Not to you. Well, it's happened. What happened 2 or 3 years ago when there was that very, 4 years ago when there was that very thin international summer and the Big Bash just took over and got the massive crowds. Like, that's when I think it shines. Like in an Ashes summer, India kind of gets, not quite the attention.
Tell us more of Paul's thoughts, Menczel.
Go on.
I think at its best, it should actually work the other way. That yes, it can get lost in an Ashes summer, an Indian summer, but that's partially because especially that Indian summer, they were scheduling the Big Bash to compete sometimes with it, and it was kind of almost hidden. If they give the Big Bash a little bit of breathing space and don't put it too clustered together, I think it actually can benefit it. Then I well remember being in England in 2013 when the first test of the Ashes was an absolute cracker at Trent Bridge, and there was a blast game on at the Oval a couple of days later, and the commentators were surprised that it was sold out, and they were just saying there's a sort of a feeling of the nation wants cricket, and it was that the Ashes had actually caused the blast crowds to get bigger. So I think at the best of times, a really good summer against India or a really good summer against England could actually be a fillip for the Big Bash. Flip side, if the international summers are a dud, then I think that cricket as a whole suffers and that the Big Bash suffers as a result. Now, I get your point that maybe it can come to the rescue of the summer, but it's going to be difficult with the fact that the Australian Test players aren't going to be playing.
What do you think, Jelisa?
I absolutely hate it. I think that everyone has hung their hopes on shortening the Big Bash is suddenly going to revive the Big Bash, which
Absolutely
I just think
hate it.
Absolutely hate shortening the Big Bash. I like the Big Bash. I like to watch as much Big Bash as I can possibly get in. It's one of the things I'm now looking forward to this summer, given, like Paul said, his assessment of the summer is pretty bleak. So the less Big Bash games makes me really upset. And I just feel like for a couple of years, everyone's gone, the Big Bash season needs to be shortened. That'll revive it. And it's like, I feel like it's one of those things that people say because they heard someone else say it. So then people say it more, and then another person says it more. And I don't think it's the surefire way to revive the Big Bash. I think the Big Bash was really good at the end of last year, and it was still a very long season. And I feel like we were all left wanting more at the end of that season. There's a lot of other factors that play into whether the Big Bash is a success or not. And now with the tests, the players that they're going to clash with the test matches, well, you're going to get less of a chance to see those players in the Big Bash now. So I don't like shortening the Big Bash. I'm not a fan of it. I don't think that's what's wrong with the Big Bash. I don't think it has been what's wrong with the Big Bash the past few years. And I think that last summer showed that. I think it's just that sports are competing with not only each other. I think every sport needs to stop the idea. Looking at you, rugby union and rugby league. I think they need to stop. Every sport needs to stop looking at each other as a competitor and realize that their competitors are actually TikTok and Instagram reels and every other form of entertainment that we have now. We didn't have 10 years ago when the Big Bash was thriving. There's just a lot of more forms of entertainment. Shortening the Big Bash just makes me sad.
I didn't know you felt that way, because for about 2 or 3 years, I felt I was the only one saying that. I said the same thing. And you know what happened? Eventually, I kind of just fell in with everyone. It's like what you said, that enough people said it. I just thought, I'm just sick of standing as the lone voice against this. I'm going to join in. And I sort of agreed, it's great that it's shortened. But I've just realized it was kind of, what you said has woken a latent feeling in me as well, that, yeah, I never wanted it to be shortened. And I don't think that it was being too long was the problem. I think that it was, it coincided with it being a bad couple of years, but I don't think it was the lengthening of it that was the problem. So I wish you'd been saying this more, or I'd heard you saying this more in the last couple of years. I mightn't have lost the faith.
I can pull up a few tweets where I tweeted it and it was highly dissented against.
Well, look, I hate to say it, but Jelisa, you are so wrong on this. You couldn't be more wrong. And I'm one. You can go back. I wanted a 14-round season. I wanted as much Big Bash, and like you, I will miss it a little bit because I'm unnaturally obsessed with cricket. Like, no one should be as obsessed with cricket as I am. So I'm not normal. But for the general public, the Big Bash had to shorten because
I don't care about them.
No, but no, okay. Well, okay, Mr. Selfish, but I care about the greater good of the game and I sort of did an assessment because Paul and I really, when we did the Big Smash Cricket podcast, we were saying it should go to a 14-round season. That'll be the most. That'll be the competition with the most integrity. But what I think went wrong, what went wrong was the fact that once the tournament got too long, it scared off a lot of international talent. So they didn't want to come. And then the wages in the Big Bash didn't keep pace with the other markets. So therefore, that was a double whammy with getting international players. I do think COVID did play a big role in sort of denting the Big Bash's luster. I mean, I think it had challenges before that, but I think they magnified them and maybe even exacerbated them. So I think you can't rule that out. And then the way the cricket international schedule has gone, even in the last 6 or 7 years, our players are much more in demand. So they're much less available for the Big Bash. So, and then you throw in the other tournaments that are springing up now at the same time. I just think they had to be pragmatic and shorten the tournament. And it pains me. I love all the cricket, but you're just so wrong on that, Jelisa. Like, I was wrong on the grand final. You have to concede on this. Take the L.
Absolutely not. And people...
What? I just laid it out for you.
Yeah, but your arguments are crap.
Go through it.
People have really annoyed me by saying, like, when people say, "Oh, it goes too long. I get sick of watching it." Well, don't watch it. I don't care. I'm watching it. Like, it's just nonsense when people say that. The other thing is, there's focus on the international players. There needs to be more focus on getting our star Australian players to play because, frankly, the
Just
internationals
laid out
in
why it's not going to happen.
the internationals in last season were boring. They were.
I just laid out why they're not good. Okay. Well,
we
it's
sat there and
killing
we
it
were
in the
really
IPL.
excited about Faf du Plessis. Boring.
Yeah.
Like it actually a lot of the time, and if you go back in the podcast and listen, Manners, a lot of the time we're actually talking about when we're talking about the Big Bash, we suddenly talk about this like young star we'd never heard of that suddenly is on fire in the Big Bash. Rarely are we actually talking about the internationals. So I don't know. I just
Because they're not here because it's too long. Not enough money. They're somewhere else. That's why we're not talking about them. Like Nick Larkin played well on the weekend.
They weren't good. They weren't good at last. They weren't good on at the last season. They weren't. The internationals that played, they weren't. They were boring. Like we were interested in Steve Smith. We're interested in David Warner.
If you get enough good ones here, eventually, that won't be the problem.
In the Big Bash, you know what they're missing in the Big Bash that they had 10 years ago? They had players that had just retired where there was still interest in them, but they had the time to play. They had Brett Lee, they had Warney, they had those players, and that is part of the reason why the Big Bash. Exactly, and we just don't have those players at the moment.
But then even by your argument, so the old players, they find a 14 round tournament really difficult to stump up for, So if you shorten it to 10,
they don't. If for enough money, they don't. They're okay.
Because they're going to get paid the same. That's the thing. They're going to get paid the same anyway, so it's not going to matter.
Point of order that you I'm glad you've had this opportunity for empathy. But you asked for Jelisa to go through your argument line by line because you're so confident in.
I wanted to.
I have done that to you about 15 times over the course of the podcast, where you'll say something, I will give a very well-reasoned argument that is bulletproof, and you'll go, "Oh no, I just don't agree," and then you move on. I said, "No, Menes, I want you to address points line by line," and you're like, moving on. So moving on. No, Jelisa's points stand.
I think you should concede, Julie. Anyway, and you are so wrong on that, and I will be proved right. So the details of that are 4-match final series. Now, instead of 5 teams qualifying for the finals, 4 teams qualify. And just on the sort of amount of cricket then being available to the average punter. So of the 40 regular season games, 10 will be exclusive to Fox Cricket, which means there'll be just 30 games for the Big Bash on Channel 7 plus the finals. But I do think
that's a big problem.
Yeah, but I do think the one good thing about having a schedule like this is, like, when the Big Bash was good, all the games were just on every night. There was no afternoon games, no 11 o'clock games on a bloody Thursday morning. You knew if you clocked on at 7 o'clock or 7:30 every night, the next game would be on. And I think they can do that much more effectively with this sort of structure.
From my memory, there were no games like that last season. There were only games when that 11 o'clock in the morning when that was the COVID affected games.
I mean, there were afternoon games, like 4 o'clock games and stuff, like less of those.
Yeah,
like
that's
4
really
o'clock
good
on a
for children.
Well, it's not good for the competition. It's like when the Big Bash was absolutely killing it, it was when the games were on at the same time, and you had Channel 10, your network, covering it, and it was it was like a unfolding drama every night. Now, got to the stage where you sort of turn on and who knows what you've missed.
I'll tell you what I miss is, and I've said this before, but I know of people, and I'm not counting myself as one of them, but I'm not all that far away from it, for whom the international, the summer of cricket has always been about the internationals. That I have a great affection for the Big Bash, but I know others who have no interest in it whatsoever, and for whom, after the Test series was over, the triangular one-day series, and more recently the T20 series, they would watch every ball of that and have great interest in that. The fact that that has gone behind a paywall and has lost all its luster, it has not been replaced. If you're not interested in the Big Bash and you're only kind of, you live for the international stuff, there's a hole there that has not been filled. And I think that that's something that they've got to address. And the answer is not 6 white ball games against the West Indies in bilateral matches. There needs to be something in February, some sort of T20 equivalent of the Six Nations in rugby union, as you know, sort of a mini World Cup. And it needs to be on free to air. They've got to get to something like that, in my opinion, of saying, right, in February, we're going to have the West Indies will be here, Pakistan will be here, we'll get New Zealand across in South Africa, and we'll get Ireland and Scotland, whomever, have a six teams playing in a pool, nice and sharp and quick, and with a final, and give it something. We need something more than just the Test cricket on free to air, I think. And the answer is not bilaterals.
Big Bash, you just okay? Because I think if.
But I'm saying there's that group of people for whom the Big Bash just doesn't resonate.
But I think, yeah, I mean, I just think if you can get, I think maybe it's not resonated because the quality sort of dropped off a bit. But yeah.
Maybe.
I see your point, though.
A really highly functioning Big Bash. Maybe they need to really throw the checkbooks out there and say, right, we are going to not just have decent money for the players, but absolutely sensational money, and wear the financial hit on that. I don't know whether they can afford that, though.
But you know, yes, go on.
A lot of your argument seems to hinge on getting international players, and I'm going to be really interested to see how your argument changes.
I just lost you for a sec. Can you repeat that last sentence?
When the Big Bash is shortened and we still don't, and because the purchase, there is a limit. I'm interested to see how a lot of your argument for the Big Bash being shortened seems to hinge on being able to lure international players. And I'll be really interested to see how your argument changes when the season has been shortened and we still can't lure international players because of other competitions, because Cricket Australia just inevitably, and sport in Australia, has a ceiling when it comes to being able to pay. I'm just going to be interested to see if you still think that the shortened season was worth it.
Well, I look forward to debating this in February post Big Bash. We can go through it, Jelisa, but I'm pretty confident, unfortunately, that they had to shorten the Big Bash. Just take the L. Just take the L.
Absolutely not.
All right. We've got a couple more things before we wrap this up. I just want to touch on, we're going to get to the Ashes stuff, but before we take a break, I don't know if the two of you caught this new proposed finance model for the distribution of ICC funds. Now,
oh God, is everyone turned off?
No, this is, well, what has happened is, so now the ICC revenue from rights to their tournaments is about $600 million a year, US. And in a new proposed distribution of funds, India would get almost 40% of that 600 million per year, and then the rest is divided up between the nations. So, and Australia and England are the next two with about 5 and 6%. And the reason that India is getting such a large chunk of that money is the fact that most of that money comes out of rights being sold to the Indian market. I think 80% of those funds comes out of just selling TV rights to India. So India is saying, well, we deserved a big chunk of it. And there has been some discussion that this is an inequitable distribution of the funds. I guess, Paul, do you want to take the lead on this one? I don't know what I'm going to get. You two are so fired up tonight.
No, I think, to be quite fair, it isn't equitable. India deserve more. I mean, they do bring in at least 80%, if not 90% of the revenue. They are entitled to say, well, why are we only getting 40%? And it's a bit rich for Australia and other countries to say, come on, you've got to do more and blah, blah, blah. So I've got no problem with that. And they do deserve more. But what I think is that all cricket administrators and cricket lovers need to do is to say, what we don't want to have is a situation in 10 years' time where Test cricket has become pushed to the margins so much that it is just a cavalcade of T20 circuses playing around the year. Because for as much as that's fine, for someone like me, I would lose interest a bit. It's always going to be my favourite sport, but at the moment, it's my favourite sport by a long way. If Test cricket got, if the journey that Test cricket has taken in the last few years continues, and it gets to the point where, aside from the Ashes and an Australia-India series, it's barely really registering, and most of the year is just one T20 tournament after the next, I will lose interest to some degree, and I just think that the sport will be lesser for that. So no problem with India getting all the money. They probably deserve more, but I think that everyone needs to say, let's not just allow naked kind of greed to reduce cricket to that level. Let's keep Test cricket as important as it currently is and as it used to be. I don't mind if 50-over cricket goes away. That'd be sad, but I think it's inevitable. I don't even mind if T20 cricket, aside from World Cups, at the international level, largely goes away. If it becomes Test matches interspersed with T20 tournaments, interspersed with ICC events, I'm okay with that. So no problem with India getting the money, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I fully agree with what Paul's saying. I think a lot of the debate around this was people were saying it wasn't equal, and I think it's just the old case of equality and equity, and it wasn't equal, but it's equitable. Like,
yeah.
Can I just jump in, Jelisa? I mean, the fact is, because of the explosion in the rights, there's more money coming into cricket than ever. So what was that?
You said, can I just jump in? And Jelisa said no. So,
I just kept going. I ignored her as usual. So yeah, I just wanted, but there is more money going to countries than ever before.
Yeah, I'm not confused about that at all.
I was telling the listeners, Jelisa.
No, but I don't think anyone is confused about that.
All I care about is a big...
I think it's
fine.
pretty basic, but
you started the segment by saying everyone's going to switch off, so they obviously know nothing about what we're talking about. Ending by like, oh, yeah, everyone knows like they're just bored with it. I just inside out.
I think everyone heard finances and just switched off. I don't think they didn't understand. I think it's just I echo the statement that Paul made, and I think the important part about it is not so much the division of money, but more the power and representation moving forward with the ICC, so that every country has equal representation and equal vote on these kind of things, and that is more what I'm concerned about moving forward over the next few years, that is maintained, because I think that will be how Test cricket is maintained.
Yeah, I mean, that's the counter to this, is that it should the ICC be giving more to prop up the countries that don't have the money and the riches that India have going into cricket. But I still think if you sort of dig down into it, it's pretty fair. I mean, yes, it's not communist Russia in like the 30s or something. All right, so we're going to take a final break, and then we'll be back with Ash's Watch. All right, welcome back to Cricket Unfiltered. It's been a fiery show. I'm exhausted, and we've still got one little segment to go. I'm Menczel with Paul and Jelisa. If you're still tuning in, having suffered through that ICC segment that we just did, thanks for sticking around. Just want to touch on the Ashes quickly. Some big news. Jofra Archer ruled out for England. James Anderson's picked up a mild right groin strain. So, Paul, they are in disarray, absolute disarray, shambles.
Are you getting warmed up for our next show where you go and have a moment for no reason? Look, it's a great shame about Archer, but it's never looked really like it's going to be anything other than that. Like it's never looked all that good. Jimmy Anderson's groin's probably going to be fine. So yeah, they're looking fine.
Well, they've just announced their squad for the first test against Ireland of the summer for them. I guess the big news is Ben Foakes, their wicketkeeper, has been dropped, and it looks like Johnny Bairstow will bat at 7 and keep. And there's been some discussion around who will open the batting for England, because maybe Ben Stokes will go up there, because they haven't really found a settled opening pair ever.
They had Hobbs and Sutcliffe were good.
Yeah, that's it.
But that's all. Gooch and Atherton were right.
But I guess the other big, that is the big news. Jelisa, Nathan Lyon predicted 5-0. Do you agree with him?
No, but I like that he's confident heading in. I think Anderson, he's the bigger worry. If that was to turn out to be something serious, that would be a big blow, and really disappointing too. I mean, I find it interesting when people get excited, when Australian fans, I know there's a little bit of excitement when one of the best bowler of the opposing team, and I don't really get excited about it. I want to face the best team, and I want to see all the fire and fireworks.
Yeah.
I really hope Anderson's okay.
I agree.
Yeah. Apart from anything else, that totally aside from patriotism, it is just remarkable to see someone at his age still perform. And as someone who's a few years older than him, while ever he's still around, it's kind of like I don't feel quite so old. I hope he goes for at least a couple more years yet.
I do think if injuries I think whichever team suffers the most injuries could be the team that loses the series, because even England, I think, are a bit thin. Like if they were to lose Wood as well, then they've lost their two really sort of in quick bowlers. So anyway, that's the England.
Just two quick things on that. One, with all the best wishes to Ben Folkes, I love the fact that they have dropped him and replaced him, because just that whole nonsense notion is, you've got to pick your best gloveman, and then if you can bat, that's a bonus. This shows that's rubbish. You pick the bloke who's the best batter, and if you can catch the ball, that's a bonus. So anytime a specialist wicketkeeper gets dropped, I'm delighted. It's slightly muddied by the fact that he's actually more than a half decent batter, but that's cool. Chappelli, if you're listening, no, don't come at me. And then,
sorry, Paul, I was going to say, I didn't mean to brush past this. You must be a big fan of Ben Stokes opening the batting. I know you don't think batting orders matter, so therefore you would think, well, sure, open the batting. What's the difference?
I think it's amusing that they've kind of that they think if we open the batting with him, we can then bring in another all-rounder, and it's like they're trying to. What's that story when you're trying to build a ladder to the moon and you've got you're one step short? So we'll just take it from the bottom of the ladder and we'll put it up to the top of the ladder and it'll be fine. It doesn't really matter where he bats, but if he can't bowl, then that doesn't do great things for the balance of their side. Nathan Lyon is a strange one. Isn't it weird that, as I understand it, almost every press conference he's ever done, with the exception of two, he has given nothing. He just gives very, very sensible, safe, boring answers. It's almost like he doesn't want to get quoted. And then ahead of the 2017-18 Ashes, Alistair Cook tells the story of he ran into him just before the press conference. He said, "Hey, how you going? How you kids?" And they had a lovely chat. And then the first press conference, they say to Nathan Lyon, "What are your hopes this series?" And he said, "Well, we ended a few careers last series. We're looking to end a few careers this series." He's brutal. And then for the next 6 years, he said nothing. And now he's coming out and saying 5-0. It's a bit strange, isn't it?
I like how you describe that. I like to describe every press conference he's given nothing and being quite boring. That is every single cricketer except for David Warner and Khawaja.
Yeah. Continuing on in the cricket news, Michael Neser and Sean Abbott have sort of been called into the Ashes squad. They will be training with the team in the lead up to the World Test Championship. So, if Josh Hazlewood doesn't come up, they're going to be on the scene. So,
right now, I'd pick Neser over Stark.
You're crazy.
Why? I just think he's a better bowler in English conditions.
All right.
I want a detailed, reasoned argument.
Okay. All right.
Just I don't.
Please spare me. No, I'll take the L. I lose. Leave me alone. Let me get out of here, please. It's late. Marnus Labuschagne scored 170 last week in the county championship. So look out, India and then England. Pat Cummins said on some podcast, I have no idea what the podcast was, but he says he wants. He was on. Yeah,
I tried to download the app to find that podcast, and it just seems to not exist. It's like a podcast that never happened. I don't know. There's 4 highlights from it, which may be the entire podcast, which is quite a nifty thing to do. Just release 4 30-second grabs and pretend you actually did a podcast. I don't know. Maybe that's fun, but
could be a new angle for us.
Yeah.
Anyway, on that podcast, Cummins said he wants to play until he's 35. So 5 more years of Paddy, 5 more years. And I predict 2 of those as skipper, 3 as just a player.
Well, again, it shouldn't be up to him. The government should say you're playing till you're 40, champion.
Come on, Winks, no retiring. All right, and very last thing, you mentioned Usman Khawaja before, Jelisa, being interesting in press conference as well. He did have a bit of a stab at the previous regime by saying that he believed that Australia had been too reactive in dropping players in the past, including himself, after the odd failure. And I think he's pointing at the era, after that sort of golden generation in the sort of 2010 onwards, they really didn't pick and stick. And, Darren Lehman had this sort of mantra, you got to pick players in form. You had some selectors who maybe sort of thought the same, Mark Waugh especially being one of them. So I guess, Paul, do you think Khawaja has a point that there was a period where the selectors were too reactive?
I think he's got a point specifically relating to him, yes, because from my memory, there was probably 3, maybe 4 times that he's been dropped from the side, where each time I thought, that's a little hard. It's not a terrible decision, but it's a 50-50 call, and he seems to have got the bad side of that call too many times. And there's one in particular that I remember thinking, no, that's wrong. That's not even 50-50. They've made a mistake there. And he's proven them wrong. I mean, he's come back. He's got an average now of 47 or 48 or whatever it is. He can just point to the numbers and say the numbers prove that I should have been given more opportunity. So specifically with regards to him, yeah, I agree. I can't really comment on whether the reasons he gave of that these current selectors have a bit more empathy and stuff like that. I don't know about that, but I think they were a bit harsh on him.
Khawaja was dropped 7 times in Test cricket. I think Khawaja's got a point.
I don't think he has a point broadly. I think he has a point with himself. I think he dropped some absurd times. There's no one else that stands out to me where, there's a lot of times I feel like Cricket Australia have held on too long.
Yeah.
Back as far as Ponting, I don't think it's a broad problem, but I think it was a problem for him.
Yeah, I do think there was a period. No, I do think there was a problem where that they, for a while there, Australia just won everything for so long, and when it started to go against us and players weren't averaging 50 like we were used to, then we were just turfing players prematurely sometimes. Anyway, I've got to dive back into the stats from the past to get to the bottom of this. All right, well, that's it. We've come to the end of our headlines. What an episode of Cricket Unfiltered. Now, if you want to follow the show on social media or find any of us on Twitter or find our Patreon page, the details are in the show notes. As I said, tickets to our live sale go on sale June 9. So details are forthcoming. I guarantee we're going to put a lot of work into this. So get excited. It'll be a great lead into the international summer. We're not doing it on grand final day, rest assured. Jelisa made sure of that. Well, Jelisa, great to talk to you. Do you want to concede finally, just to wrap this up? Just take the L.
I cannot explain to you how much I don't want to do that, nor would I do that. It's like admitting guilt when you're not guilty.
It was great to talk to you. We'll catch up soon. Yeah, Paul.
It was wild.
I'm exhausted.
I feel like you regret it.
Well, it's emotionally exhausted. I feel like I took a beating, and I didn't do the international schedule. I didn't shorten the Big Bash, but somehow now I feel just crestfallen about next summer.
I don't know. You're part of the staff, man. I've got to point the finger at someone.
It's true. Heading into next summer, though, between now and then, there is a World Test Championship final. There is an Ashes. There is a World Cup. So
it's all good. All good.
It's all good. Yeah. And there's this podcast that's just getting better and better until we kill each other. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.